How's it going?
All right.
That is the most adorable little.
That works pretty well.
Is that for coffee?
Could be coffee. It is today.
I probably drink 3 times that much coffee a day. I guess I'm a land use planner. What I do is really boring, so I need lots of coffee. I'm a land use planner.
All right. Everybody ready to get going?
Yeah.
Have your video, your microphone, and
Video,
record.
audio,
And then record on the
cord.
right side.
On this computer.
Recording in progress.
Thank you.
Okay. Recorded and progress. All right. It is 7 o'clock on July 18th, 2024. I'm going to call this public meeting of the Woodland Planning Commission to order. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearings examiner, or a court. Don't believe we'll be doing that this evening. Don't run away.
I'm gonna point your mic down and make sure it's on.
All right. I got it. Will
I
you,
just got it this way instead of behind you.
once you get back there, would you call roll
Sorry.
for us? No, that's fine. Just fine.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Tel Jensen,
I'm here.
Brian Matson,
Here.
Sharon Watt,
Present.
Shauna Gawthorne,
Present.
Robin Zorich.
Here.
Full house. All right. First up on our agenda is citizen communications for items that are not on the agenda. So if anybody wants to chat with us about anything else than the minutes, commercial zoning amendments. All right. Well, I'll probably give you more opportunities later, but it's okay if you're shy. Next up is approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
All right.
second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda as written. Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. Next up, consent items. Approve the minutes of our June 20th, 2024 meeting.
I move to approve the June 20th minutes as presented.
I second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes as written. Any issues on that discussion? All right. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes as written? None. The motion carries. All right. On to the meat of our meeting, which is a public hearing for commercial zone amendments for RV occupancy standards. Is Ordinance 1562. Item 24-0085 on our agenda. And with that, the public record is open. Want to check with the commission, see if anyone has any ex parte communication to declare or conflicts of interest on this item.
No.
No.
No, me neither. All right. Moving on, do we have a staff presentation?
Travis is going to give that presentation, but he ran out to go print new copies of that draft
Travis.
ordinance for you.
All right. Okay.
He's
Do-
the only one with keys.
The only, okay.
I'll
All
take
right.
you over there.
Well, we might have to shuffle this around a little bit. The city is the applicant in this case, right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to move on to public testimony while we're waiting for Travis. It's a little out of order, so you know, if anything, and don't have a huge crowd here tonight, so if anything in Travis's presentation shakes something else loose you want to mention, I will probably allow that as well. Hey, there he is. Never mind.
Travis is quite quick,
I take it back. You're all going to have to wait.
very quick, and I like it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Fabulous.
Thanks.
It's warm.
We did. We
It's
got
fresh
that
off
far.
the printing machine.
We are ready for your presentation whenever you are.
Sorry about that. So for the record, my name is Travis Goddard. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Woodland. And the item you have before you tonight is a potential code change for RV occupancy in the City of Woodland. I'll give you a little bit of background on this. RV occupancy was limited to 30 days prior to 2019. And an applicant submitted an application requesting to go to year-round occupancy or year-long occupancy. And as a result of that zoning text amendment request, the council opted to go to, or the Planning Commission recommended 90 days, and the council opted to go to 90 days, and that was Ordinance 1437. Now the language, oh sorry, I'm going the wrong direction here. The RV parks are discussed currently in code as a conditional use permit in a couple zones, or in the highway commercial zone, and it is in section 17.72, which is the conditional use permit criteria, specifically section 1772-100, which is the criteria and standards for specific conditional uses. D, which is recreational vehicle camper parks, has 7 criteria, and specifically it talks about signage. There's camper space size, which is 150 square feet per space. Water and sewer requirements, and basically it requires that the park have restrooms, baths, and shower facilities. Has a 20% open space requirement. It does allow residences, 1 residence for either the manager or owner. It has occupancy standards, and then and then the last one is you have to meet all applicable regulations and standards for RVs. So it has to be licensed, it has to be roadworthy, it has to be on its wheels, those kind of issues that are not regulated by the city, but the assumption is they will be approved by the Department of Licensing. Now the occupancy standard number 6 is a little quirky, so I've included it here. This is the 2019 change. Language is included on here, and that is no one camper unit shall occupy a camper site for more than 30 consecutive days per year, and that's what was changed to 90 days in 2019. And then the standard goes on to say this standard shall not permit a camper to be moved off-site for 1 day or so and moved back in thereafter. So that's the language that existed in our code previously and survived the 2019 review. So that's a little sketchy, and it's always been kind of a bone of contention for anybody who asks about this code section since then. Now, why are we here discussing this? Recently, there was permit activity that included a new park, a new RV park here in town. And the conditional use permit for that park included conditions of approval for occupancy. And those conditions of approval for the conditional use permit were more restrictive than what the code allows, like we had previously discussed. So it was 90 days, and then there was a required separation between being removed and brought back in. And knowing that we could not unfairly apply the code in our enforcement process, staff reached out to all RV park owners to inform them the city would be enforcing the regulations. And that's what started kind of this discussion, because the existing park wanted to be left alone like they had been. And we told them, well, once this new park is up and running, when we start enforcing the rules on them, we were going to start enforcing the rules on you. So the operators of Woodland Shores Park RV engaged the staff regarding the applicability of this time limitation on their 29-year-old operation. And they had a question about whether or not we could apply it to them after all this time. So during this discussion, we came up with two potential solutions for their situation, and that is they could ask for non-conforming right determination to determine whether they would be able to continue operating as they had been, or the other option was to ask for a developer's agreement with the city. Those are the only two viable solutions that we saw. Now, the question about grandfathered rights here, because to qualify for non-conforming rights, which is essentially the common term of grandfathered rights, it's non-conforming rights. Under 17.60, which is the Woodland Municipal Code for non-conforming rights, they would need to demonstrate that they were operating in a legal manner consistent with their permits before the rules were changed. That essentially what allows them to continue operating legally as they had, even though the rules change. And it's a vesting right that comes along with operating legally. And in this case, the permit was approved in 1992 with a 30-day occupancy limit, and they have not been in compliance with that condition since day one. So unfortunately, they really couldn't qualify for non-conforming rights. So the other option that we had talked about is a developer's agreement. So this is an option, and it could be a policy decision, but the council would not be advised to enter into a developer's agreement because essentially it would be a developer's agreement that the city is not going to enforce its zoning code on just that one particular property. That is a policy decision, but it's not a good policy decision because it would seem fundamentally unfair to treat property owners differently and that they should be treated equally under the zoning code. So really the only other option that the council has to consider, and that would be looking to change the zoning code itself. So the council has authority to make changes to the zoning code, but it cannot do spot zoning because that is not legal. You can't design a specific zone for a specific property. You need to make a generic change to your zoning code. And then, so the best option would be to look at the zoning code and see if there's another option rather than just designing a new zoning section. So, sorry, wrong way again. Okay, so if we're looking at a zoning text amendment, the city really has three commercial zones: the C1 Central Business District, the C2 Highway Commercial District, and the C3 Neighborhood Commercial District. So the C1 Business District, Central Business District, is essentially our downtown core. You see it in the dark red on this slide. And it has limited capacity for an RV park because there's not a lot of undeveloped properties that are big enough to accommodate a park. It's not really conducive to RV parks simply because of the small size and the limited amount of space that we have downtown. It does not, it does allow residential under limited circumstances, but generally RV parks would not be in character with the C1 zoning district, and that's staff's opinion right there. So the second option is the C2 Highway Commercial District. This is the pink on this slide, and it's located throughout the city. It is located near the I-5 interchanges. It is intended to be for high traffic areas, high visibility commercial uses, and it is intended for to be accessible by automobiles. And it does allow outside storage and displays for retail spaces. It has it looks for complementing uses that will serve those automobiles, and the zone specifically says they want to minimize undesirable impacts to neighbors. Now the C2 zone does have vacant land that is available, but the question fundamentally is, are RV parks compatible? The RV so the question is RV parks compatible? With the recent application that went in a couple years ago, the neighboring C2 property owners in the Belmont Loop area came out en masse and made massive arguments that it was inconsistent with their neighbors or with their properties if the RVs were allowed to stay year-round or for longer periods. And essentially the concern was when the business owners go home at night, there are going to be people essentially possibly transient, which I don't mean unhoused, but mobile residents who live in mobile residences moving from site to site, and they had nothing to lose, and so the possibility of doing vandalism and causing mayhem at night was increased because of the nature of those long-term residents. And the other thing to remember about the C2 district is it does not allow residential uses. I think it was a little over a year ago, we had a discussion about whether or not the C1 residential exemption should apply in the C2 zone, and the Planning Commission recommended that the above-ground residential should be allowed in the Highway Commercial District, and the council flat out went against your recommendation, and they rejected any kind of residential uses in the Highway Commercial Zone. And then the last option we have is the C3 Neighborhood Commercial District. Now, this commercial zone is not used very often because there's virtually none of it in the city. And as a matter of fact, I'll cover both of these areas. So it's very limited in area. There's limited capacity for an RV park opportunity, and it's not really conducive for RV parks in the current locations. However, the neighborhood commercial zone does allow residential uses currently. So it's like the C1 that there is some residential allowed in the zone, but not in the C2. Now, the two parcels that we're talking about are, so going back, the parcel on the left, which is at the roundabout. It's across the street from the corner store. You see the roundabout on the left, it's down and to the right, so it's kind of southeast of the roundabout. And there currently is a little red building that may or may not be buried in blackberry, depending upon the time of the year and when it was last cut. So, but it's this parcel here on the right, you can see it. It's very unassuming and it's very small. And then the other parcel is located at the south end of Gun Club Road, and it is the current site of the Lewis River Fellowship Church. So it is 100% site developed, and it is unlikely to redevelop in the future. But those are essentially the only two neighborhood commercial sites in the city. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, we're talking about RV occupancy, and the question is, where would long-term occupancy of RVs best fit in the city? And there are essentially two main concerns. One is the compatibility of the use with surrounding commercial uses, and the compatibility of people living in RVs, and the conversion of commercial properties to what is essentially a residential use. So there's kind of those two questions. So let's talk about those real quick. So RV compatibility, the C1 Central Business Zone, residential uses are allowed, and it's not really in character with the downtown. In the Highway Commercial Zone, you want auto-oriented activity. It's intended for high traffic, high turnover, meaning residents or vehicles come and go at a high rate, and commercial activity. Residential uses, this is where that slide comes in, were outright rejected in 2023. And then the other choice, RV compatibility in the C3 district, it is intended to serve residential while minimizing undesirable impacts and allows residential as a permitted use. Now, staff finds that the long-term RV occupancy would be most appropriate in the C3 zone for that reason, because it allows residential and it has the residential aspect of being consistent with residential uses. Now, the ordinance that you have in front of you, Ordinance 1562, you have a draft. It was to address the possibility of having long-term RV occupancy that could be accomplished within the city. Section 1 of that ordinance addresses the bad language describing the limits to RV occupancy under a conditional use permit. So specifically what it says is down below, in blue is the current language, 90 consecutive days per year. This standard shall not permit a camper to be moved off-site for 1 day or so and then moved back in. That would be removed and it would say 90 calendar days per year. And that would be consistent with the C2 zone, meaning that it's auto-oriented, high turnover, and the expectation is that it's going to function as a highway-oriented commercial use. And that would be a change, and that's under the conditional use permit conditions where it currently resides. So the clarification of 90 days, plus or minus moving off for a day or so, it would just be a straight 90 days in a calendar year. Now, do you maybe have any questions, or you want me to keep going and go through the 4 sections?
I have a question, and maybe this isn't specifically relevant, but when you do a conditional use permit, you can add all sorts of conditions that you don't find in the code to mitigate whatever impacts. That's why people that do what we do, like conditional use permits, you can better mitigate impacts that maybe the zoning code doesn't directly talk about.
Yes.
So and I get it, this doesn't change the Woodland Shores one down. This doesn't affect them, but if you have, and then you have a new one come in that goes under conditional use permit, pretty common to have different conditions that apply to this development because it has different impacts on neighbors and stuff. So as far as applying the zoning code unfairly, I don't see it that way. But again, I think what I'd like to see is some sort of remedy for the people in the Woodland Shores. That's what I'm hoping is going to come out of this, but you haven't finished yet. So.
Yep. Okay. So we'll get to that and we'll address that.
What do you think about that conditional use thing, about that not necessarily being unfairly applied?
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. So for those of you who are not familiar with what Brian and I are talking about, because Brian is a professional planner as well, so the conditional use permit, or in typical zoning, what you have is a list of permitted uses that are acceptable for that zone. Then there's a list of prohibited uses, stuff that's not allowed in that zone. And then usually you have a 3rd and 4th category. Maybe you have a temporary use like farm berry sales and that kind of stuff, where it's not year round, but they are allowed on a temporary basis. And then the other category is a conditional use. And typically a conditional use is a use that might require special conditions because of the nature of that use. It's not typical. And typically the example I use for that are schools and churches. They may have 0 activity for churches, 5 days a week, but on Sunday, everybody arrives within 30 minutes and everybody leaves within 30 minutes, and it's bedlam. And Wednesday night, you might have the men's meeting, and Thursday, you might have the ladies' meeting, and you might have the teens on Tuesday. But generally, it's a use that only has special conditions or special issues that need to be addressed 1 or 2 days a week. Schools are kind of the same way in that they tend to have traffic at specific hours, and they have weekend events or school events, and so they might need their lights on till 10:30 at night on football nights, but the rest of the nights the lights have to be off at 9 o'clock or dusk, depending on what the code says. So it gives you the opportunity to add conditions that might not apply to everybody else during regular situations. Any questions about that? And the point that Brian had brought up, and that is the code does authorize us additional conditions. The problem in this case is we are not looking at making things more restrictive. We are talking about making things less restrictive. So unfortunately, we can't write a condition of approval that says one site can spend more than 90 days and the other one has to spend less than 90 days. So we could write a condition that says they can.
So that's the code, but we're talking about zoning.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
So we can't change the code, but we can put them in different zoning, in different zones.
Yes. So we're saying what we're going to explore here is this idea is based on those 3 different zones, we might still prohibit them in the downtown core. We might only allow them for quick turnover, auto-oriented people on I-5 that we're serving on a short-term basis. And then we might look at a longer-term neighborhood where if it's in a location where it's less likely to have impacts, then that's an option that would be allowed in the neighborhood commercial zone. Okay, so section 2 expands on the purpose section of the neighborhood commercial zone. And specifically what it says is it establishes that the C3 zoning should not be located in high traffic streets. That would be highway commercial zones. So like on 503, because it's high traffic, it should be highway oriented uses under the C2 zone.
Even though that's where both of our C3.
Sorry?
Even though that's where both of our C3 parcels are.
Yes. And I think that part of the reason why we're clarifying that is because it seems inconsistent that they are on a high access street. If anything, you know, maybe the corner store property is more fitting for the neighborhood commercial because it's on, you know, on that location for the same reason, but for some reason it's zoned light industrial. C3 could for the second bullet, limits the C3 zoning to minor street frontages by limiting new access points. So we don't want neighborhood commercial uses to be accessing busy streets because it's supposed to be neighborhood in character, theoretically walkable. The C3 could severely limit the viable uses of the site, which is a possible negative issue. So it might be considered a down zone because the highway commercial district allows a lot of commercial activities. The C3 zone limits commercial activities because they're not meant to pull in a lot of people off of the highways. They're meant to pull in people from the neighborhood. And it would enable less viable C2 commercial properties with limited access and visibility to convert to a C3. So by allowing RV parks in the C3 zone, it might address that issue. And any commercial property owner could request a rezone, but you would need to identify whether or not you're willing to take that reduced options for your property. Because, say for example, if you are at a high visibility intersection, it might not be the highest and best use, so the council might not think that that's a good use of that commercial property. But we also have some landlocked or very remote commercial properties that might be better used as a neighborhood commercial property. Now, section 3, it adds RV parks as a permitted use in the C3 zoning district, and it adds a section to the C3 zoning district, which does not currently exist. And that's section 4, which basically takes the conditional use permit conditions, the 1 through 7 that we discussed before, the signage, the occupancy, the required to be able to meet the RV standards, and it adds it as a permitted use in the C3 zone but it requires that you meet those conditional use permit standards as a permitted use. So you'll still have to do a site plan, but you would have to meet the standards that you would in the C2 zone, just without a conditional use permit. And then the one change from the conditional use permit standards would be to allow for year-round occupancy for RV parks in the C3 district. Now, I want to point out that this ordinance does not resolve the existing code enforcement issues for the RV parks here in town. The RV park that was built in the 90s would still be out of compliance, but it gives them an option of potentially becoming legal if they could justify a rezone to the highway commercial. Now,
And then have their CCNRs adopted.
yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then it would not affect vested or permitted RV parks, so both of those parks would not become illegal if they're operating legally. And then any commercial zoned property could request a C3 zone, but that is a policy, a discretionary policy decision that we would look at on a case-by-case basis. So it doesn't guarantee anybody a conversion from, say, C1 to C3 or C2 to C3. So say, for example, there's a big empty parcel next to the new library site in Horseshoe Lake. They could theoretically request a highway commercial conversion to a neighborhood commercial for an RV park, but it would be discretionary as to whether or not the council feels that that is consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So it's not a guarantee, but it's a path to make them legal.
Do we look at zone changes?
Sorry?
Do zone changes come through us?
Yes, zone changes would come to you for review.
But they can't get year-round occupancy unless they get rezoned to C3. Right? Okay. I just
Under
want to make
this,
sure I understood.
under this scenario, that is correct.
Okay. But it's a
It-
path.
It just provides them a path. Tell, you look troubled.
Sort of tangential to the current discussion, so I'm gonna leave it aside for now. Thanks, Travis. Is that the end of your presentation? Okay, great. Any more questions for Travis?
Not right now.
Okay. We will have plenty of time to ask more questions.
Did you have some, you look like you were raising your hand. I didn't know.
Let's, hold on one second. Let's just open up public testimony then. So why don't you come on up and tell us who you are and.
Bob Nelson. I'm with Woodland RV Resort LLC. I'm a member. And listening to the flow of the code and the zoning, I submit to all of you that we have the best possible property for this to be considered for C3. We're in behind the training center. We're up against the hill. We're not bothering anybody. We are highway commercial C2 zoning now. We facilitate nightlies on and off freeways. Not going to bother anybody but Popeye. You know, it's a unique property, and you know, we need, again, like I mentioned to a few of you before, we need long-term residents here. We can't move forward. This will not be developed by us. I can tell you that right now. So anyway, but I do believe it's, of the properties discussed and mentioned, it should be highly considered. We've got 23 acres that can create a lot of affordable housing and meet the C3 residential requirement.
Thanks. Appreciate it. All right. Any questions for Bob? All right. Anyone else? Public testimony is open, so.
I'll take it.
All right, come on up, please.
Hey, guys. For those who don't know me, my name is Doug Frymark. I'm a town councilman, position 4. But I'm not here particularly as a councilman, so don't let that influence you one way or the other, okay? I have stayed at Woodland Shores multiple times for multiple months on end. It is one of the best small town, relatively small, a little bit on a cramped side. It's not a brand new, wide open place like some more modern places are. But the people over there run a good, tight ship. I've known them for years. And I'm telling you, as I think a lot of people probably have already, it's an asset to the city as it is right now. Now, I'm a little confused about grandfather clauses, because I know a couple of instances where town council have made exceptions to current zoning and given case by case. That's not a limitation, but it increases the options on it. So I'm not quite clear on that, Travis, but I do like this C3 idea. That seems to be straightforward. It would have my support as an individual. That's all I'm going to say as far as the politics goes, okay? And I think...
Douglas,
Yes.
I just got a text. Can you speak up a little closer to the microphone?
You guys can't hear me?
At home.
Okay.
At
Do
home.
it.
they can.
All right, all right. All right, I'll shout into the microphone here, guys.
Thank
I've been
you.
told that before, too, so. Don't envy your position, Dale. Let's see, where was I? Keeping that RV park as it is with long-term parking will enhance our long-term higher density requirements that are coming by the state by the handful. Addition of new ones, when they're properly done, might also do that. I know a lot of opposition to the Belmont RV park, and I'll be glad to talk to each and every one of you if you want on a one-on-one basis about the pros and cons on that. I have lots of insight, personal information on that. Personally, I'm the property manager also at Woodland East Manufactured Home Park, previously owned by the current owners of RV Inn and Styles on Belmont Road. And I want to get into politics on that, but I can tell you there's lots of conversation about those folks, okay? I kind of like this C3. If we can carve out just a small area and say, yeah, that's a new C3, I would even be inclined to do that to the Columbia River RV park. They've been there a ways too, and they run a decent operation. So there's a lot of community support that, and I'm again speaking as an individual, guys, and as a lifelong RVer myself. Bought my first RV in 1968. That's what happens when you're 77 years old. You got too many years of experience. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Hey, Doug, is the Columbia one, is that the one out on Austin's Point?
Is it
Okay, so that's not, is that the one you're talking about, Columbia River?
on the dike?
Yeah, okay, so that's way out of the city, so that's
Yeah.
just, that's Cowlett County's
You ever bring
deal.
that in?
All right, fantastic. Anyone else have public testimony? See if anybody's online. Only the mayor. Come on up, please.
Hi, my name is Meg Freymark. I have a question. Will making Woodland Shores permanent, which I hope you will consider, will it also add and help the city with its affordable housing? Anybody know?
I don't know, but sorry, Tal, I didn't
Go
mean
on.
to.
No,
But
go on.
I worry that we can't technically qualify RVs as any kind of permanent housing, because I don't think the state allows them as permanent housing. We can extend the duration that they can stay there, but I don't know if it qualifies technically as multifamily, or it can be quantified for those calculations. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
it makes sense, but I think some of the people there think that it is affordable housing, and that's
That's their house
one-
to them. I
That's
get that,
their
I get
house
it.
to them.
Right.
And we'd be uprooting them, and I'm just very also concerned with the whole city in general having adequate affordable housing. And I thought if that could be a consideration, the city would benefit from that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Meg. Okay. Check one more time, make sure nobody else is online. Okay. All right, I'll give you a second shot at it, Bob, but you gotta come up.
She brought a question to mind along that lines. Again, Bob Nelson with Woodland RV. The whole concept of cottage homes coming to bear, people are coming into that. I guess my question is, does that fall into the formula or calculations, homes on foundations for the affordable home calculations? And can they be a part of the C3 residential aspect of that?
So are you talking about park models?
Park models?
So are they gonna be certified by HUD?
Yes, all of
I'm speaking from my Clark
No,
County
no, no, no,
perspective,
that's-
so it may be different.
No, they are completely
They're
certified,
certified?
all certified at factory level. You know, requires occupancy permits and all that type of stuff. I'm trying to understand maybe what latitude we might have.
I'm not super familiar with the cottage standards for Woodland, but I am fairly familiar with the ones from Clark County. I assume they're somewhat similar.
Right.
There's a lot of like architectural requirements on cottage
Yes.
developments where they have to be similar looking and, you know, it's centrally located around an open space, stuff like that,
Yeah,
right?
I was just kind of
I
curious
assume they're kind of similar.
if that would apply here in the C3 residential orientation to facilitate affordable housing.
I don't know if the city council would want to allow residential developments within commercial zones. You kinda wanna keep them separate, but
Yeah.
RV parks are a weird little
understand.
unicorn where they kind of float between them. It might benefit you not to call it a residential development
Got
as
it.
far as allowed use.
I was just trying to get a clarification. Thank you.
I'm taking a guess at it, Bob.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue. I think, you know, RV parks have, in Woodland and elsewhere, been kind of de facto affordable housing, if not, you know, officially or, yeah, kind of strictly meet that definition, but, you know, they have filled that role and, you know, potentially could to a greater degree. I don't think it's, you know, I personally don't think that should be the only solution if it is determined that it's a solution.
Tell, they're having a hard time hearing you.
All right, okay. Will I ever learn? Okay. All right. All right. So our normal schedule here. We have a staff response and applicant's final rebuttal, but that won't make sense. So I'm going to close public testimony and move on to deliberation. So yeah, let's do that. Thoughts? Where are we at?
Well, I'm feeling talkative, so I'll keep going.
Okay.
I agree with you, what you said about de facto affordable housing. Yeah, of course it is, you know, and that, to Ms. Fryermuth's point, that is gonna be part of my vote, is that consideration. That's a strong portion, or a strong part of my leanings towards allowing an indefinite stay, right? I don't know if you were here, Bob, but the last time the Woodland Shores people came in, it was pretty compelling testimony. Right. Very compelling testimony, and I don't want them to have to, you know, to leave, so I like this solution. It seems equitable. It's a path to get there. I also think that, you know, enforcing a 30 or a 90-day stay on existing developments, it's almost like you're punishing them for something that could happen, but that has never happened, right? The reason for a limited stay is that you don't get some of the RV parks that, and I don't mean to bash Longview, right? But if you go down Industrial Way, you can see some of those really sketchy looking RV parks there. We don't have anything like that.
No.
And I don't want to punish them or over-regulate them because they could do that when they never have, right?
Well, any rules we change existing parks won't be subject to it, because they'll be an existing use.
Well, no, not, well, unless I'm incorrect in my understanding. My understanding from Travis's presentation is when the Woodland Shores was approved, the standard in effect at that time was a 30-day stay. So they're currently in violation. That's where they're in trouble with code enforcement right now. And so by allowing
I see
them
what
to
you're talking about. Okay.
do its own change.
To
and if-
zone 3, yes,
Then-
I'm following you.
Right? I think it's kind of a, if, you know, it's choose your own adventure, but you gotta go
Yeah.
choose the right questions to get there, but.
Yeah, okay.
But by doing that, doesn't it kind of open up Pandora's box for everybody else?
It might.
But they have to have the guidelines of the C3.
Yeah, and they'd have to have their CCNRs approved by the council, and that means that they're enforceable, probably by the council, right? Because if you vary from your CCNRs, council can call you on it and revoke your permit, because that's a condition of approval. I think that there's a safety net in place for things to get too crazy, but, you know, that's just my opinion.
There is, yeah. Well, and
Be on a heavy traffic.
I think, you know, because it would be subject to those, I don't wanna call them conditions, but requirements, and it has to be approved by council, am I understanding that right? So that the CCNR, what else would, their site plan?
I almost, am I cutting you off?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I almost think that, you know, somebody could apply for a rezone anywhere you're at.
Yes.
Right? They could, but it's almost like, I don't know, if you were in a C2 zone, I almost wouldn't approve a rezone unless you're an RV park. Right? You know what I mean? Because if you want the highest and best use, once you put a RV park somewhere, nothing else is ever gonna get built there. Right? I mean, at least, not forever, but
Yeah.
you're taking up that piece of land, and nothing better with more job creation or anything is gonna be able to occupy that land while that RV park's there. Right? But once you have an RV park there, I almost think would be a strong convincer for me to allow it to go to C3.
Oh, so if an RV park was put in a C2, somewhere on a C2 plot, changing it then to C3? Okay.
But the
Robin,
CC
sorry.
Go ahead.
Haven't heard from you, Robin. And I'd like to.
My personal opinion is that I think that the Woodland Shores has a lot of good things about it. People come and work here for a limited time, and they can stay there for that. I think that, as far as I know, they don't cause trouble. They don't have, I don't know, indigents
Riffraff.
or whatever, riffraff. There we go. And I would like to see them be able to stay. So, I mean, they've been here a long time. It's not like this is a brand new park. So,
Okay. Shauna, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine. Would the CCNRs need to be approved by council first before they requested a new zone?
That
Or
is-
would the zone already, or would the CCNRs already be, see, wouldn't the CCNRs need to be approved first before they requested a new zone change?
I'm not sure that. Thank you. I'm not sure that there is a condition that CCNRs be approved by the council that could be added as, since we're dealing with these, you could require that.
Require if they're requesting it.
But I'm starting to, yeah, Brian?
The framework I was thinking of it is, if, right now, the current rules is you can stay 90 days.
Yes.
Right? If you want an
Calendar
indefinite
days.
stay, part of that is you have to get your CCNRs approved. and you have to get it rezoned to C3. I don't know if the rezoning and the CCNRs are tied necessarily, but they would both have to happen to get to the goal of indefinite stay. Is that accurate, Travis?
But what would the CCNRs entail? Like, how is that? Like, where I live, we have CCNRs and an HOA that enforces it. So is changing it to a zone 3 enforcing the CCNRs?
Yeah. And so it's hard to say for sure because traditionally the city doesn't enforce CCNRs. The city council could look at an application for rezone and say, there's not enough meat on the bones here for us to approve this. If you were to come back with a pool facility and CCNRs that'll ensure this and that and this and that, the applicant could come back and yes, and get a zone change, and the council can say, come back with the site plan, and we like this idea, but we're not willing to give you a rezone without a specific use and site plan and recreation plan and transportation and capital facilities plan to go with it, all that stuff that comes with the site plan. They could ask for that to be brought in concurrently, so that way they know what they're getting as a condition of the rezone. They don't have to give you a rezone and then wait for you to promise to do one thing and then deliver something completely different.
Sharon, what do you think?
Well, it sounds like a good solution. Have the Woodland Shores people been consulted about, how do they feel about this? Do you think this
Who's that?
The Woodland Shores people, do you think they're?
Yeah. I haven't talked to them because this is not a specific site-specific fix. They are going to roll the dice just like anybody else if that's the direction they want to go. The only two viable solutions I saw them from a code level were the two I discussed in the presentation, and really neither one of them is viable without a policy decision. And I would rather the council change the code than start making property by property deals with developers agreements.
Okay.
They may not be defensible.
Okay.
I agree with your statement, Travis.
So does that answer your question or address your concern?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have any language for grandfathering anyone in? Because I know that my work uses that a lot, but is there any language around grandfathering anyone in?
It's not what we call it, but
Yeah.
Yes, so in our code, it's 17.60, and it's existing non-conforming uses, structures, and lots. And there is specific language because there's a difference between the three. So in other words, you could have a non-conforming building, but a conforming use, like, say, for example, the building was old and didn't meet current building codes, but it was a permitted use, so in that case, it's grandfathered for building standards, but not for use standards.
Okay.
I've got a couple questions on the 90 days limit and what a year means. Is that like a calendar year? Could somebody say the last 90 days of 1 year and the first 90 days of the next year?
Yep, the code would propose 90 days in a calendar year.
Okay. So somebody, if they time it right, somebody could get 180 days. Okay. Just be
That is correct. They
coldest,
could.
rainiest.
Working the
days.
angle still.
Yeah, and the 90 days,
thought of that.
it's an arbitrary number, right? Like, it does seem to be in the right spot, but it is just kind of made up. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Thinking out loud a little bit here. I'm a little just
Do you think it would be better as in a 12-month period rather than year?
I do.
I mean, I think it's unlikely to be a huge issue regardless. I doubt people are gonna read our code and come in, you know, in first of October.
So that's an important distinction for whoever makes the motion, because you could change section 1 to say 90 days in a 12-month period as opposed to year, or you could clarify it to calendar year. Because yeah, technically you could go through September through December and then January through March, and it turns into 180 days, if that's not the intention.
Maybe we want to leave that little cheat code in there. I don't know.
Well, I think that too, the reason that we added any number of days as a limitation is because it's not that people want to stay 180 days, it's that they want to be there 365 days a year for however many years they want to be there. So I don't see it being a huge issue, just because, you know, 90 to 180, it's still not full year occupancy, which is what we're really talking about.
Yeah, and you know, that's a good point, because, you know, when we have, every time we've talked about these things, the utility of, you know, it's not quite short term but not permanent workers housing has come up, and, you know, having a place to stay for months at a time but not years at a time. And I don't know, like, does 90 days accomplish that? I don't know, like, how long are these jobs that we're talking about? Unfortunately, I don't think there's anybody here who can answer that for us, but I think that's, you know, if that is one of the purposes that we even allow, or one of the goals that we are even trying to accomplish with allowing RV parks in the C2 zone, seems like something we should at least think about. And like, 3 months to me on that score seems a little low. But then again, I mean, because it's like construction projects, or, you know, what are we talking about for these jobs? I mean, short-term contracts are, I don't know, some buildings take 3 years to build.
I often hear the industrial training center is a good example.
Okay, yeah.
Students who are there for a term or two.
Yeah. And how long's a term? Don't know. Let me see if I can find out.
So Travis, can I ask you a question about, you had mentioned that part of the pushback on Belmont Loop was that business owners were concerned that there would be an increased opportunity for crime or vandalism. Has any of that materialized whatsoever?
So this business, or that business, has not been open that long, and I don't know if there are any statistics that show that there has been an increase.
One of the, I get this argument a lot with multifamily projects where the crime, yeah, not everybody that lives in an apartment is criminal, right? I mean, it's just
Stupid vandalism,
Just
and then
having
leave.
people around prevents
Yeah.
crime. Yeah, that's real, and that's true across a lot of different conditions. Okay. Well, it looks like I mean, this isn't conclusive, but the industrial training, all I'm seeing is up to like 5 days. There's a bunch of different courses, so I imagine somebody would want to take a bunch of them in a row, but you know,
You want to double it?
I don't think it would be like 9
Would you
months.
want to double it? Do you think that's closer to a real scenario of somebody working on a project? Like 100 instead of 90, make it 180? That's
I wouldn't-
that's 6 months.
I
right?
wouldn't mind that, and you know, I get like ultimately there's a possibility of, if there's more than one RV park, you know, they can just moving every 6 months sounds better than moving every 3 months to me.
Right.
But
RV hopping.
yeah, and you know, do we want to allow that? I don't know. Like, once we get in the realm of 180 days, then, you know, you can just hop back and forth between two indefinitely. I guess I'm getting a little, I don't think this is the primary meat of, you know, what we're.
Can
what
I
we're
weigh
hoping
in on
here.
that though? Because
Please,
that,
yeah.
that was discussed previously. And the point was, yes, so now that we do have two parks, you could theoretically, they could work together to support each other year round. But at any point, if you're a knucklehead and you are causing problems, you know, when your 180 days are up, you're not coming back to this park. So it incentivizes them to behave well so that they remain welcome in each of those parks.
Okay.
One thing I want to bring up too is just because even if we were to double the 90 to 180, that doesn't mean that any individual park could be more restrictive if they wanted to.
Yeah.
It's their park, their rules. We don't want you here for 180 days. They could half it. You know?
Or would maybe the solution be to do 90 days in any 180-day period? So that way you would push them into that, you have to go back to where you're welcome twice a year instead of once a year.
Just in an effort for people to check in more often. You know, I think any of those are reasonable.
And on the flip side of that too, you were talking about how any individual RV park could choose to be more restrictive if they wanted to. But so could the city if it's a conditional use. If we said it's 180 days, we can still look at things on a case-by-case basis and say, you get 90 days. This is a conditional use permit, and this is a special condition that we're giving you.
But once. You only get one shot at it, right? For each applicant.
That's assuming that they continue to be in compliance.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know that I have any answers for that. I just wanted to, I guess, throw sand in the gears. But it does seem like something worth thinking about. And so the C3 part, which I think is really what we're here for. It seems like an all right solution. I'm not wild about it. Mostly because I have always had high hopes for C3. Actually, you know, being small businesses, primarily for small businesses that are compatible with residential uses. Which is weird. Our permitted uses, like, you know, grocery and convenience stores, that's sort of there. Signs, that doesn't make sense to me. Electric vehicle infrastructure, that doesn't make sense to me. Wireless communication facilities, that doesn't make sense to me. That's what we've got. We're not going to change those tonight. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems a little, you know, things change, right? And so that's okay. Like if the purpose of our C3 zone is changing over time, that's fine. I don't think that's what it was initially created for. But again, that doesn't matter. We get to change it as we see fit. I mean, not us, but us as a city.
So you think it's taken away from the small business aspect of it?
Well, yeah, but that is entirely aspirational because it has not been used for that to date. And,
correct.
You know, I have always hoped that, you know, as long as I've been on the commission, I have hoped that we could either get some actual C3 or allow those uses outright in our residential zones instead of having a separate commercial zone. And I'm, you know, in 11 years, I haven't got a whole lot of traction on that. So I think I could probably let that one rest for the time being. Yeah, I don't know. I think my any objections that I have they aren't really about the like impact of it. It's just kind of like, it seems a little, it's just like stapling something on. I don't know if that, or like string and bubble gum kind of stuff, but yeah, I do agree that RV parks in this city are serving a valuable function for just the city in general and the specific people that use them, especially. So if this is what it takes to allow that to continue, or at least give it a shot at continuing, I could go along with that. Anyway, I don't need to keep bloviating. Any other thoughts?
I have a question for you, Travis. I'll try to keep it short. So, let's just say the Woodland Shores, let's say we recommend approval and the city council, feels the same. They come in for their C3 zone change, and would we require them to follow all of the standards in section 4 to approve the zone change? Because I'm looking at this, and I haven't been in the Woodland Shores Park, so I don't know, but do they have 20% of the total site as usable open space? Because if they don't, would that preclude them from being able to switch to the indefinite stay option? You know where I'm going with that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. They would also have to meet the criteria for zone changes. They would also have to demonstrate that they meet the comprehensive plan for planning or goals and policies for the commercial uses. And so they would have to meet a higher standard, and it would all be contingent upon them being able to make a viable argument that 4 out of the 7 council members would agree that it's in the public's interest and the city's interest to make that decision.
Okay, I told you I'd keep this short, but I'm failing. So, when I've reviewed zone changes, I've found them to be somewhat vague approval criteria. Is the same here? Okay, okay. That's good then. I don't want to offer them a path that they can't achieve, is
Yes.
what I'm worried about.
Well, and that is the danger when you get into the policy, and that is depending on what 7 council members you have. But the other benefit is every election cycle you might be dealing with 7 different people, or at least a portion of them different. And as we know from our marijuana efforts, which are coming before you again next month, that you wait long enough, the bodies of your enemies will float by, right?
Okay. Hadn't heard that one before, but
You-
all right.
you just-
That's great.
That's a Sun Tzu saying. It's
Okay.
from the Art of War.
Okay.
Little light reading.
I didn't realize, that your practice was informed by Sun Tzu. That's good to know. Yeah, and I think that is both, a gamble, but also kind of a feature of our system of government, right? Which ostensibly, if everything's going according to plan, our elected representatives will, reflect the community's values. And
Now
those values change over time.
Now, the other option, which we didn't include here, and that is you could just simply recommend that it become a conditional use permit in the C3 zone instead of a permitted use in the C3 zone. There currently are no conditional use permits, so.
That was another question that I forgot to write down. Sorry, I'm going to deviate from that for just a second. That's a good point. The permitted uses for C3, it says all other uses are not permitted or are permitted as a conditional use pursuant to this chapter. And then we don't have any conditional uses in here. Unless you just left that part out for us, which, just to save space, because it wasn't.
So what you see on the screen is 17.40, which is the neighborhood commercial zoning district. There are 5 listed permitted uses, and we are suggesting that it become number 6. There's also conditional use section below, administrative conditional use permits like vending kiosks, and conditional use permits for hearings examiner, and those include churches, fire stations, library, wireless communication facilities, basically new cell towers, and it could also be included in this section as well. That would be less of a radical change, and it would be more of a consistency. It just changes the options for C2 to C3 as well.
Is a zone change administrative or hearings examiner?
So a conditional use permit, it would be up to you whether you want it to be in section 030 or 020, which is the administrative or conditional use permits.
Okay, so another thing I'm a little unclear about is, zone changing the zone is different than like a permit to operate, right? Like, so how do those things play together when it's an existing operation?
Well, so a site plan talks about the physical development of the site. Regardless of what the use is, it's strictly physical standards. A conditional use permit is not necessarily physically related, it's use related. So you could have a building that functions as a gymnasium and a school and a church, but only the church has special conditional uses, regardless of what the structure looks like. You could also run a church out of a movie theater or out of a gym or out of a bingo hall that is built for the physical structure might be different, but the use is the same in structure to structure. So a conditional use permit is related to the use and a site plan is related to the standard. Now, zoning is kind of the overarching umbrella where you can address physical standards and uses how you see fit. And it throws in an additional wrinkle, and that is the process. Zoning allows you to do stuff that's exempt from site plan or that requires a conditional use permit, so you can add more hurdles, you can add more physical standards, you can limit or increase the uses that are allowed, because it's kind of the rule-making umbrella for how you define the zone.
So would zoning change on its own? Is that an administrative decision, or does that go to a hearing?
So it's what's called a type 4. It's a legislative decision.
Oh, a zone change is?
Yes, a zone change is
There's no difference between
legislative.
zone change and plan
Because,
change then?
yes,
Okay.
no. So a zone change would change the zoning map, and a comprehensive plan change or comprehensive map amendment would change the comprehensive plan map. So our comprehensive plan, so you see on the wall over there, we have 2 maps next to each other. The comprehensive plan essentially has 3 main designations: commercial, industrial, and residential. The zoning breaks down high-density residential, medium-density residential, low-density with big lots, low-density with low lots or small lots, commercial. The 3 that I mentioned, there's the downtown core, there's the highway commercial, and then there's the neighborhood commercial. And then industrial, there's 2 flavors: heavy industrial and light industrial. So in that case, it's the umbrella of the umbrella. The zoning is kind of the umbrella for the development standards.
So even a zone change within the same genre of comp plan, that still goes legislative?
Yes.
That, I'm clear on that.
Through us first.
Okay.
I mean, making it a conditional use seems marginally cleaner to me.
Do you,
Because if you make it a conditional use permit, we theoretically would not need sections 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Because it would be regulated by 1772, which is section 1. But we might need to make different changes to section 1.
But you're not gonna make Woodland Shores go through a conditional use permit. You're gonna let them do a zone change, and then they're gonna comply with the new RV standards in order to get an indefinite stay. That's
No,
the path, right?
unfortunately, they're not vested under the current code. If this code changed, they'd need to come back and
They have to do a conditional use,
get a new conditional use
okay,
permit.
okay,
If they want to go from 90 to year-round occupancy,
right, okay.
they would need to get a new CUP.
Understand. Did you propose just site plan review in your recommendation? And, because you just brought up conditional use just now, is that something you thought, oh wait, I should have included that maybe?
No, the way it's written, under normal circumstances, a site plan review would be triggered by a development application.
Okay. Substantial fee difference?
I think it's substantial, but
It's all substantial to me.
if I was investing a ton of money, it might not seem substantial, but to me, it's always substantial.
All right.
I'm content. But I don't want to move forward before everyone else is.
I have nothing more to say.
Okay. Shauna?
Well, I mean, we could talk about this forever.
Yeah, okay. Last looks.
Yeah, I'm good for now. I'm pondering things.
Okay. Travis?
So I would like to throw up the presentation one more time, just so we can make sure that we don't skip an important part here. Let's see. I'll make sure I got the right side. So for section 1, if you were to go for a conditional use permit, that if that's the route you go, you will need to make changes to section 1 because the C2, the current language as proposed, is for C2 to have a 90-day limit. You can still implement that, but you would want to add a statement for C3 for year-round occupancy. And you were batting around the 90 days within a 6-month period, 90 days within a calendar year, 90 days within a 180-day period. You'll want to clarify that language because what's in before you is specifically for permitted uses in that zone. And then 3 and 4 might disappear and if you change section 2.
Okay. All right. I'm pretty agnostic about which route we go there.
So I would encourage you to ask clarifying questions before you make a motion.
Robin, you have any more?
I don't.
Okay.
I think I understand it, but you're convincing me that I don't, just in what you keep saying.
I think
C2 is a 90-day. If you want to go to indefinite, you have to get a zone change approved and a CUP permit to get indefinite stay.
That's what I understand you talking about, but that is not what's in
Oh,
the
it's not what's
ordinance
in
that's
here.
attached.
Okay.
That's correct. So if you're going to start going sideways on me, I want to make sure that you're pointed in the right direction, not just pointed sideways.
You
So
seem eager to
that-
give that a shot, Brian.
My,
so go for
okay,
it.
well, no, now that I'm gonna back off a minute. I thought I was asking clarifying questions. My understanding must be incorrect.
Going the wrong way.
Yeah, maybe I don't understand it. It's a 90-day term right now in C2
Yep.
and C3.
No, because
Oh,
they're not
it's not
permitted.
allowed in
Not
C3
permitted
yet.
in
Got it,
C3.
okay.
I think that what Travis is trying to clarify is that if you want to go the route of making RV parks conditional uses in the C3 zone, that you would not pass that zoning section that says RV parks in the C3 zone get year-round stay. So you'd want to add it to the RV occupancy in just the regular conditional use standards, because right now it's separated by this is the C3 standards and this is the C2. But if you change it to make it conditional, it's just the C2, so you'll want to pull some of that
Yes.
yeah, hopefully that
But it's
didn't
the
make
same
things
result
more
either
muddy.
way. It's the same result either way, isn't it?
confusing.
I think it's less confusing to have, these are the standards in C2, these are the standards in C3. And this is how you're proposing it, right?
As a permitted,
That seems
yes.
cleaner to me than to add, in case you want to throw this unicorn in here that has any standards you want to throw in it.
Yes.
Okay, I want to keep it cleaner.
So in that case, section 3 you'd want to reference it as not a permitted use, but a conditional use. So that would be an easier way to correct it.
Okay, I'll take the first stab at it. I move that we adopt ordinance 1562 with the exception that we make the RV park a conditional use in the C3 zone.
Yes, you
And-
recommend approval.
Huh?
You recommend approval?
I recommend approval. But wait, I'm gonna wrinkle it, and you'll like this, Tel, because you were a big proponent of this earlier. Okay, I recommend approval of ordinance 1562 as proposed by staff, except that the minimum, or the maximum stay should be increased to 180 days in the C2, and in the C3 zone, RV park should be a conditional use. I'm hard of hearing.
Okay.
I'm glad you talk loud, so when I replay it, I can get the wording right.
No. And I'm sorry. Just to keep us moving forward and, well, so I already closed public testimony and it gets messy. I don't know. Actually, I'll defer to consensus here. Does that run us into any like problems with our bylaws or anything
We can reopen public testimony if we want to.
Oh.
in the middle of a motion?
Yeah, I don't think you can do that during a motion.
Okay. I withdraw my motion.
Thank you, I was waiting for
All
that.
right. Okay.
Speak now or forever hold your
Yes.
peace.
I'll open public testimony again to hear from Doug and also see if any more folks who've joined us have some things to say. 1 second, Bob. Doug's ahead of you.
I'll speak loud from here. They've already agreed that Belmont Blue Point.
You're getting quieter, Doug.
What?
You're getting quieter.
Am I getting quieter?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll fix that. Guys, got to hear.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right, just for you, refresh your memory, the RV park on Bell Road was permitted with a 90-day limitation in it, period. That hardly flew with the local businesses. There will be great opposition to anything more than that, ever. And the developer has admitted that eventually he was going to petition to extend that because that's the only way they can make any money on a long-term basis. So keep that in mind too, guys. I will tell you as a councilman, I would vote against anything longer than 90 days for any other facility than Woodland Shores. Now I'm out of my councilman position. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. Bob, did you want to?
Please.
Yeah, come on up.
I spent probably an hour talking with Bob Nelson, Woodland Shores RV, about an hour talking with Esther over at Woodland Shores and how she did her business and everything like that. And I'm the guy that came to the table 4 or 5 years ago talking 90 days, 1 day off, 90 days. If you're in good stead, you can come back to that spot. That's the way Wilsonville RV Resort was. And boy, she convinced me those people cannot move. Like I'm putting a new park in. My people are more mobile. They can move on 90 days. She totally convinced me those people they don't have rigs. They can't pick up and move. It's a huge hardship on them. So the concept of where 90 days? 180 days is even better if you have a downsize, somebody downsizing, they want to travel the world, okay, they go someplace for 180 days, but they still have a home base. That might work, okay, but the reality of the whole thing is C2 is not going to work whether it be 90, 100, for Esther and her crew, we could maybe make 180 days work, but our particular property here begs of C3. I can meet all those criterias, okay? And I would love to have the year occupancy and put everybody on a year lease that they can guarantee they could stay there a year. And I'd be welcome to be under the auspices of apartment legislation or whatever. But I don't see anything short of that's going to help Esther and Woodland Shores.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, just to clarify, we're kind of moving two different directions for, yeah, anyway. We got a couple new folks. Public testimony, interest? Okay.
I'm still there.
All right.
I remember.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna close public testimony again. Thanks everybody for bearing with us there. The public testimony is the most important part, so we like to get that right. Okay, Shauna, you were trying to telepathically.
So, yes, I
suggest a
was
change.
because Brian, we have this telepathy. Okay, so 90 days for zone 2. But we didn't say anything. Oh no, because now I'm confused.
I think it was, if you don't mind,
Yes.
that if you make RV parks a conditional use in C3 to add a sentence to the end of
Thank you.
number 6 on page 2, right at the top, occupancy, saying in the C3 zone it would be year round, because otherwise you'd be applying that same standard in
Thank you.
C3.
That's exactly, yes. And keep the 90 days in C2. Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Okay, did you get that, Brian?
No.
Okay, so right now in the new section 17.72.100D.
Looks like the
6
same.
says occupancy.
Yeah.
In the C2 zone, no one camper unit shall occupy a camper site or park for more than 90 calendar days per year. But it seems like that's not really, it seems like that's pretty agnostic about the C3 zone.
But there would be no other standard in the code for C3. Because the language proposed for C3 was specific to if it was a permitted use.
But now we're doing the conditional.
I'm not sold on conditional. I mean, if you have the standards in there that you like for regular site plan instead of conditional, I'll go with site plan. I thought that maybe staff was leaning towards conditional for more flexibility, but if you don't need it, I'm not in love with it. I can just.
It's more protective. It may not be, it may also be more flexible, but the issue that was raised in that is, and you pointed this out, the conditional use permit allows you to get at other issues on a site-by-site basis that may not fit into that standard site plan standard.
Okay. So I'm gonna take another stab at this, and I fully understand that city council can change it, they can reject it, they can do what they want. I mean, that's part of the process. But I'm gonna stick with my original, at least my original starting point, and then, clearly you will vote on it, so you guys may not agree with me either. But I think that that I recommend approval of staff's proposal of ordinance number 1562 with the following changes: that the standard stay, maximum stay should be increased to 180 days, and in the C3 zone, that it triggers a conditional use review instead of site plan. Was that clear enough?
Calendar year or 12-month period?
I'm gonna say calendar year, just because I think it's simpler. And you have one start time, one stop time to keep track of.
Although you could do the last 180 days of 1 year and the first 180 days of the next year.
You certainly could.
Okay.
All right, we got a motion.
Okay, I will second the motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Do we have any discussion?
Well, we haven't really talked about this still.
Yeah. Have we addressed the division between the C2 and C3 for occupancy? No, we have not. Okay. Brian, do you understand what happened?
No.
Okay.
Explain it to me. What am I missing?
So by varying from the proposal and not including the list of standards for permitted uses in C3, you're only left with that occupancy standard that says, in the C2 zone, no one camper shall occupy a camper site or park for more than 90 calendar days per year. And then it doesn't say anything about C3, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
So I'm interpreting that section 2 would become a conditional use permit, and that 160 would apply as a conditional use standard. So I think we would keep section 4. We're just changing section 3 to say it needs to be, I know where you're going. I think I interpreted it to be, you want it moved to section 1740.030. So what's up on the screen there? So currently the language says 1740.020 as a permitted use, and you're asking us to put it in 1740.030.
Correct.
And it would be E. And E would still require us to add section 4, which is pulling the conditional use stuff from everything else into a new section in
Do I have to say all that?
160.
Or
No.
that- I mean, okay.
That's
Just
how
confirm,
that's
okay.
how I would send it to the council based upon your motion.
Okay.
That's my intent.
Okay.
And I gotta sign it before it gets to them, so, and I
Right.
understand your intent. And they're good at this, so.
For C3 or C2? Now I'm confused.
C3.
Thank you.
C2 would basically stay as it is, only
As
it's
the
180 days.
Okay.
100
Well, we got 180 days.
I'm,
yeah.
180
yeah, I'm
days.
recommending, but I don't know if that'll hold up. Doug's already told me that he doesn't like that, so. I'll be okay if that doesn't go through. I just thought I'd throw that in as a starting point.
Yeah, I think that's. Separate.
It's my understanding that they would, if this is eventually approved by city council, that they would have to request a rezone to the
Correct.
C3. And that would be their path to get to an indefinite stay allowance.
So if they're C3, then they don't need to adhere to the C2.
Are they already C3?
No.
No, they're
No.
C2 also, right? Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
So if the rezone goes through, assuming they apply for one.
That's 180 days, you suggested versus a year in C3.
No.
No,
No,
that's just,
that's for C2.
right. But I wouldn't fall in love with that 180 days. I don't know if
Okay.
that'll happen.
All right, so, the motion's clear. Any more? All right, now, why don't you call a vote?
Sharon Watt,
Aye.
Shauna Gothorn,
Aye.
Robin Zorich,
Aye.
Tel Jensen,
Aye.
Brian Mattson.
Aye.
All right, great work, everybody. Motion carried unanimously even.
Thank you, staff. That was complex. Had a
Yeah.
lot of moving
Yeah.
parts, so I appreciate
for-
your patience.
Thanks for persevering with us.
Right.
I'm gonna close the public hearing for this item. And I don't see anything left unless you got some interesting city business you wanna tell us about, or scuttlebutt.
I do. At Monday's council meeting, the city's consultant SCJ Alliance did a presentation for the city council in regards to our housing needs and our land capacity. And so that's available for anybody to go take a look at, and their 2 technical memos are attached to the staff report. So, or the agenda item on the agenda. So that will be coming to you for discussion at the next Planning Commission meeting. So if you want to get a look at that and see how the numbers shaked out, that's available online.
Anything surprising?
Yeah, actually, it's surprising that based upon our analysis, the fact that we have a lot of applications in the pipeline, we appear to have enough capacity for our projected growth. But the one thing that wasn't addressed in there, and that is market factor. So we can meet our projected housing needs, or we're pretty close to it. But if we want some market factor, which might typically be 10 or 20%, that's not necessarily baked into the pie. Now, part of the discussion that came up, and that is, it's a 20-year growth projection, and because we have a bunch of projects in the pipeline, and we specifically have a couple subdivisions that just recorded first phase plats, we're going to see a bunch of housing in the next few years. We've only had 15 units in the last 4 years. We're probably going to see maybe 25 to 50 in the next couple years each year. And then we might not have any more activity for another 5 or 10 years. So the market factor and the fact that to keep housing down, supply and demand considerations, the fact that we don't have extra land in the supply may not make a difference, because we have supply in houses over the next few years. And so unless we want to talk about expanding the urban growth boundary in the next few years, the comp plan won't necessarily need to discuss that at this time.
Okay, that's different than previous years. That is interesting. All right, excellent. Anything else before we adjourn? All right. Call it at 8:37 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming out and giving us testimony. Thanks, staff. I know this was a weird one. I think you did a